What's going on, everybody? Here we are with another week, and we're back after it to talk about sports cards. Now, I do a lot of different videos about a lot of different topics and a lot of different themes to them. But one of the things that has been a cornerstone of my channel since very, very early on is looking at data. See, I think that a lot of us, we might assume something is going on, but we don't really know unless we actually run data. And so what I wanted to do, because, all the talk, all the buzz that, over the last few months is how we're in a down sports card market. And we are. I mean, prices have dropped. There's no doubt about it that the cost of things are lower than they used to be. Now, for us long-term people that are in this for the long haul, that are collectors, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it means our dollars can acquire more. Now, the other part about it that is something to consider is while sports cards have been dropping in value, inflation is still roaring. So if a card that used to be $100 is now selling for $80, but inflation is up 5% per year over the last 2 years, it's really more than a $20 drop because inflationary adjusted money would tell us that, things have gone down more than just 20%. And I'm just hypothetically throwing out the 20%. Now, some sports have dropped more than others. Basketball is way down. Modern cards are way down. And then there are some things that have held very steady. So what I wanted to do, because we haven't done, and I try to check in on a few things. I try to check in on grading, what's happening with grading. I try to check in on values, what's happening with values. I try to check in on, what's everybody interested in. Well, one of the things I'm really interested in is looking at what the drop over the last 2 years has looked like. We know that things are down. We know that some things are down more than others. But there are two things I was thinking about. I was sitting there and I was going, what I really want to know is how have the lower grade cards done compared to the middle or higher grade cards? Like, how have the values of, say, PSA 2s of a card done over the last 2 years compared to, say, a 4 or a 6 or an 8? Are the 8s dropping more than the 2s, or are the 2s dropping more than the 8s? Now, I started wanting to look at the numbers. I was trying to run some data on this, and the first thing that came up is there aren't a lot of 8s. And a lot of people who have 8s aren't looking to sell them. So it was quickly very clear that I wasn't going to get very meaningful data for this kind of thought when we're looking at 8s. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to compare how have a 2 grade compared to a 4 grade compared to a 6 grade during the 2-year drop. What's going down more? What's going down the least? How is that all looking? And then the other thing that I wanted to check out, and I started thinking about, was how has PSA done compared to SGC, right? If we're in a down market and things are going down, what's going down more? Is SGC going down more, or is PSA going down more? Or is it irrelevant? It's just everything's going down at approximately the same percent. Now, those of you that have been with me for a while know that I have gone long bouts of collecting data where I go through sales histories, pull the data, throw it into Excel spreadsheets, find averages, what percentage is it up, what percentage is it down. And it's really, really time consuming. Well, there was a game changer in that for me a few weeks ago, and I talked about it a couple weeks ago, and that was the Market Movers app. And I just raved about the Market Movers app, and I'm like, this app is unbelievable. It has all this data, it has all these charts, it has all this stuff. And I told you the whole process about how I went to them and I said, can you cut us a deal if people are interested? And they said, yes, we'll give you a promo code. If they use your promo code, they'll get 20% off for life, as long as they have the Market Movers app. So remember, if you're interested in getting the Market Movers app at any of the levels, it doesn't matter if it's a monthly or an annual subscription, it doesn't matter if it's the starter or the premium or the unlimited. Any level, monthly or yearly, you can get 20% off using the promo code midlife. Now, if you're not interested in it, you use another app, maybe you use Card Ladder, maybe you use whatever it is that you use, that's fine. But I'm just blown away with the Market Movers app. So what I did is, instead of, literally, I used to spend probably 10 hours compiling data, tabulating the data, and analyzing the data. And instead I spent maybe 10 minutes to pull this data. Needless to say, I'm very thankful for the Market Movers app. So let's look. We're going to look at 5 cards. I could have pulled 10 cards or 20 cards. And, the more cards that you pull, the more meaningful the data is. But I'm like, let's just do a snapshot. Let's take a quick snapshot. So I just randomly said 5 cards from 1950-ish to 1960-ish, somewhere in there. And I just, first 5 cards that popped into my head are the 5 cards that I ran. And there were a couple things that surprised me. There were a couple of things that I wasn't really expecting. So again, we're going to be comparing 2 things. One, how have the 2s held up to the 4s to the 6s during this down market, and how has PSA done versus SGC during this down market. Over the past 2 years, and all the numbers that I ran were from the first week of November of 2021 to the first week of November of 2023. And the results were very interesting. Let's check them out. Okay, so first off, in Market Movers, they have their SCI Index, which is a collection of cards and the current value of those cards. And you can see it is in a pretty significant decline as of late. This is sort of like their Dow Jones, for example. So what I want to do, though, is I want to show you the process that we're going to go through. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to just type in, how about a 1955 Jackie Robinson? And I'm going to compare 3 cards. And you can compare up to 6, depending on the level of the Market Movers app that you have. And so I'm choosing a PSA 2, a PSA 4, and a PSA 6. And then I'm going to hit chart. And what it's going to do is it's going to show me what the sales have been doing. But I'm going to change up here. You can see up here it has the range, and it's just the last few months. I want to go from 2021 November to 2023 November. And now we can get a pretty good idea. And you can see the dotted trend line. The dotted trend line is sort of like the average of the sales prices. So you can kind of get an idea. So if you look here and we go along, you can see that the 6th grade is down a fair amount. And then when we look at the 2 and the 4 grade, they're fairly flat, actually, for the Jackie Robinson. So what I want to do here is I want to go through the 5 cards. So the first card I picked was the 1951 Bowman Ted Williams. And again, the line on the top is a PSA 6. The line in the middle is a PSA 4. And the bottom line is a PSA 2. Now this is really interesting. So again, here's the range, the date range up here that I just highlighted in red. So first off, the 2. The 2 is pretty even. right? If you go across the last 2 years, the value of the two, that trend line, which is the average of the sales, it's pretty much even. But then if you look at the PSA 4, the PSA 4 has actually gone up a little over the last 2 years in a down market. And then if we were to look at the PSA 6, that's again the top line. When we look at that top line there, it's gone down, right? You look there, it was much higher 2 years ago than it is now. So fairly interesting. The 2 is even, the 4 is up, and the 6 is down quite a bit. So, again, this is just one card. This is a Ted Williams. Now, the other thing I wanted to check was how is PSA doing against SGC? So I chose the same grade. I chose a 4. And you can see the gap. If we go back 2 years ago, the gap between the value of a PSA 4 and an SGC 4 was pretty small. And it's still pretty small. It maybe went up a little bit. See, it widened there just a bit over to the right. So it's pretty equal. The SGC is trailing the PSA by a similar amount, maybe a little bit more for the Ted Williams versus, where it was 2 years ago. But it has widened just a fraction. All right, so now let's look at the next card. So I chose a 54 Topps Hank Aaron rookie. So we look at the 2. And the 2 is down slightly. It went down just a hair. Not much. But it is down. And then if we look at the 4 is also down slightly. So the 2 and the 4 for the Hank Aaron are a little bit less expensive than it was 2 years ago. And then if we look again, the top line there, it's kind of all over the place up there, but the trend line shows us that it's been pretty even. So it's been very, very flat for the 6. So again, the 2 down slightly, the 4 down slightly, the 6 looks pretty even, which is kind of the opposite of what the Ted Williams was. Again, whenever I run these numbers, I don't know what I'm going to see, what I'm going to get. I just run them to find out. So when we look at PSA versus SGC, and again, this is the 4, you can see the gap there on the left. The PSA was just a little bit more valuable than the SGC was 2 years ago. And if you look over to the right, you can see that the PSA is just a little bit more valuable than the SGC now. It's very, very comparable. I would say that the gap has widened slightly, but very, very slightly. You might even be able to say that it's even from where it was 2 years ago. So not much change. PSA, just a hair more valuable than the SGC. All right, the third of the 5 cards is going to be the 1955 Topps Sandy Koufax. So again, let's first look at the 2. And when we look at where we started with the 2 and we look at where we are now with the 2, again, very, very flat. It maybe went down a hair, but barely. We look at the 4. The 4 grade is down. That one's down a little bit. The 2 is very slightly down. The 4 is down a little bit. And then the 6 is down a fair amount. Again, when you look at the trend line, it's clearly downward on the 6. So the 6 is going down the most. They're all down, but it's by far the most dramatic for the 6 and the least dramatic, I think, for the 2. So, as we expect, the cards have lost value. Now, if we look here at PSA versus SGC, and we look back 2 years, the gap was a fair amount, right? We look there. You can see that gap on the left in red.
it's a fair difference. The PSA is quite a bit more valuable than the SGC, but if we look now, it's almost equal. They're almost equal, the SGC versus the PSA, in the 4 grade for the Sandy Koufax rookie. So SGC has gained quite a bit of ground. It has tightened up quite a bit for the Sandy Koufax. So, again, this is our 3rd card. Now, at the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of show you a summary of the findings. But we want to actually look at these charts. And again, these charts are so easy to pull up on the Market Movers app. I do it on my desktop when I'm looking at the charts. And it's very quick. And at the level I'm at, I think I can compare 6 cards on one chart. All right, so the 1959 tops, the PSA 2 for the Bob Gibson rookie is definitely up, right? That yellowish line at the bottom, it has gotten more valuable even in the down market. Now, if we look at the PSA 4, it is certainly down, but it's down slightly. It's barely down, but it's down. And the most significant is probably the change of the 6, which is down a fair amount. Like the angle of the downward trajectory of the 6 is quite noticeable. And the one in the 4 is barely noticeable. But the 2 is up, the 4 is a little bit down, and the 6 is definitely down. Now, again, we want to compare the PSA versus the SGC, and we look at the gap from 2 years ago, and it's a fairly significant gap. Like PSA is selling for quite a bit more than SGC in the 4 grade. But then we look at the difference now, and once again, just like with the Sandy Koufax, they're almost equal. So SGC has, value-wise, gotten quite a bit of ground made up on PSA over the last 2 years. So that's kind of interesting. In fact, the SGC value is actually looks like it might be up a little bit versus the PSA value for the 4, which is down a little bit. So almost no difference value-wise. All right. The 5th card is the 1960 Topps Mickey Mantle. And at the bottom, we've got the 2 grade. That's the first one we'll look at. And again, it's the yellowish color in this chart. And it looks very, very flat, like very flat. And then we look at the 4 grade. And it also looks very flat, but it's a very slight trajectory down. It has gone down a little bit. And so that's interesting that the 4 is down a little bit, but the 2 is very flat. And then the 6 is down the most. The angle of the downward trajectory on the trend line in the 6 is the most noticeable. So the 6 have dropped significantly more than the 4 and way more than the 2. And then again, if we are comparing PSA to SGC values, again, 2 years ago, PSA had a very noticeable lead value-wise. And it wasn't crazy more, but it was definitely more. And then if we go to where we stand now, they're almost the same again. So the last 3 cards, the Koufax, the Gibson, and the Mantle, went from a fairly significant advantage for PSA value over SGC to now they're almost the same. The gap has significantly tightened. Now, again, the first 2 cards in Ted Williams, it looked like the gap widened a little bit. And then the Hank Aaron, it was about the same. It maybe widened a hair, but barely. So these are the things we want to be keeping track of because, you know, if we historically think that PSA values are way more than SGC, but then all of a sudden SGC's keeping up, we want to make sure that we're aware of that. So let's look at the summary here. So for the Mantle, the 2 is pretty even. The 4 and the 6 seemed to have lost value. For the Bob Gibson, the 2 went up in value. The 4 and the 6 seem to have gone down. For the Koufax, they pretty much all went down a little bit. And then the Hank Aaron, the 2 is down, the 4 is down, and the 6 is fairly even. And then the Ted Williams, even up and down. So the 2s seem to be doing better in the down market than the 4s or the 6s. So who has been helped the most? So again, when we look at PSA versus SGC, the Ted Williams had the one really kind of noticeable increase in value over the SGC over the past 2 years. The gap widened a little. The Hank Aaron, you might be able to say the PSA did slightly. The others, SGC caught up.
So what did you think? I thought that was interesting and surprising. First off, the gap that SGC has closed. I mean, in, I think it was three of the 5 cards, the SGC card had a much bigger gap in value 2 years ago than it does now. SGC is catching up. And then one of them, it was maybe it got, a little wider for PSA, but barely. I would almost call it even. And then there was one that it seemed like PSA widened the gap. But to me, that looks like SGC is closing the gap in the value between cards of the same grade, which is interesting. The other thing that I found interesting is it seemed to me like the 2 grades have not dropped nearly as much as the 6 grades and the 4 grades. It seems to me like the lower graded cards are much more level than the bigger drops of the better graded cards. And some people will go, well, that's because they're worth more, so they've dropped more. Yes, but at the same time, the percentage drop, I mean, the line in several of those cases was a pretty dramatic drop. But in most of the cases, the 2 was either flat or going even up a little over the last 2 years. It surprised me that the 2s are holding very strong, whereas the higher end cards are the ones that have been hurt the most. What is the data that I just went through that either surprised you or didn't surprise you? And what is the data that you'd also be interested in having me run and taking a look at? I mean, we're comparing PSA and SGC, and we're comparing 2s to 4s to 6s. What else do we want to see? Because to me, we have to keep track of the market. Just like the stock market, there are all these tools and all these channels, MSNBC and, all these finance channels, Fox Business. There's all these channels that are tracking the stock market. But there aren't a lot of places that are tracking the card market. But the tools are there because of market movers. Again, I'm big on the Market Movers app. If you're not, that's cool. If you want 20% off, promo code midlife, and you will get 20% off. I would sign up. I have it myself. I think it's a great app. But if you're not interested, that's totally cool. Let me know what you guys think.